So let me give you the pathway real quick, and so let me just call it out. Just name it. So what we discovered and learned, and was that every disciple is not the same, and they're not in the same place. And so early on, we thought, well, God had given us these 5 principles. Now we have 3 relationships and 2 rhythms that we're practicing, and now we're putting it in a little book, a journal that's easy to use. I called it the hammer, and now we're ready to save the world. But what we quickly learned was that one size doesn't fit all.
Mm,
And so it really depends on where people are on what we're calling the pathway. And so when we think about the pathway, uh, we're looking at the progression of disciple making from beginning to end. And so, for example, the beginning point, there's 5 critical milestones along the way. And we want everybody to get, and it's
mhm,
progressive, we want everybody to move to milestone number 5. But the first milestone is what we just call the pre-disciple. Where does disciple making start?
mhm.
And so, you know, there are people out there who are open to Jesus Christ as the one and only way because some miraculous way the Holy Spirit has already begun to draw them to a relationship with the Father through his Son, Jesus Christ. Does it over and over again. Every single one of us get there through that. If you haven't been through some process of the Holy Spirit drawing you, then you just probably got enough religion to just send you to hell.
Yeah, because Scripture's clear about the fact that it's the Holy Spirit that brings people to faith.
It's the Holy Spirit. And so we start with the pre-disciple. So we believe that disciple making and evangelism is not something you separate,
Mhm.
but it's one and the same. And so we begin with the pre-disciple who's open, who's sort of in this process of openness. And then secondly, and by the way, these are generic terms. Like one of the things that we really enjoy doing is helping churches work through their own pathway and build it out so
Yeah.
they can build a disciple making culture in their churches. And that is absolutely critical. And what I've learned through some of the consulting I've done is that when people own it and own the language creates worlds and it really becomes there. And so we didn't want to come up with one size that fit all. We just want to come up with some principles and some learning and help churches develop their own sense of culture and direction and pathway.
And that's one of the big reasons we're gonna give you all the overview of what each step is, but then we're actually gonna go back and we're gonna dig into each one
Yep.
because, you can create language once you understand what it is you're talking about. And then you may decide that, "Hey, yeah, pre-disciple works for Matt and Dave, but I like the word seeker." Great.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I really like my generic terms, but when I watch churches start coming up with their own language, I just get fired up, because they
yeah.
have taken the time and the stewardship of really wrestling through the lenses of their own internal culture and coming up with it, and that's always a good work. So,
Yeah.
pre-disciple, then the second is a new disciple, whatever you call it. You might call it believer, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter. But a new disciple, and that's just someone who's crossed from death into life.
Mhm.
They experience the new birth. They are a new disciple. And then we go to the third one is what we call uh, growing disciple, and to us, a growing disciple is someone who has learned to surrender their life and are beginning to bear fruit.
Yeah.
You know? And then here's c my f but that isn't what we're shooting for. The next one is the grow and by the way, you don't leave your growing behind you to move to the next one, but you take it
Right.
with you, and then it's what we can call the reproducing disciple or disciple maker, you know?
Mhm.
And I'm most often just refer to that as the disciple maker And the disciple maker is someone who is now relationally engaging with others to reproduce themselves in
Yeah.
that person, you know? So and then the last one is, one of my favorites. I like all this stuff, but it's catalytic disciple maker, and that's the to me, is where we're headed. And, my friend Todd Wilson has much to say about mobilizing
Mm.
everyday missionaries, and that's really what it is. It's when everybody or that disciple begins to see beyond, um they begin to see themselves as someone who called and who sent to the harvest field to plant the gospel, to make disciples, and to form new expressions of the gospel through churches and small groups right where they live, work, and play. Man, they are
Yeah.
the mission. They become everyday missionaries, in
Well,
other
and
words.
I think it's pretty interesting because as you walk through those pre-disciple, new disciple, growing disciple, disciple maker, in those, you can be pretty active in that process, like pretty hands-on. It's like raising kids. Like when
Yeah.
you have brand new kids, all the way up through till they're like 18, they're getting ready to leave the house. You're very engaged, you're very active in their life. The interesting one with the catalytic disciple maker is the catalytic disciple maker is like having grandkids. You're trusting that you've poured the DNA of family into the kids, that you've given them a healthy picture of what family is, and then they go off and they choose to do the same. And so I think it's like the difference between level 4 and level 5. Level 4 is a lot of making disciple makers, but that catalytic disciple making, that level 5 stuff, it's like grandkids. It's out of your control. You can pray for them, you can encourage it to a point, but in reality, that happens when you've got healthy disciple making and healthy discipling happening in your culture.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's really all about movement. So now we're not gathering, we're creating movement, which is just multiple streams of, generational disciple making. There's a stream where David is making disciples who make disciples, who have now made disciples who make disciples. So now I have grandchildren, spiritual grandchildren, I have spiritual great-grandchildren, and I have spiritual great-great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
Okay, so I may in reality, if you just think about it through sort of that family tree analogy, I may know my, grandchildren. I probably do, I mean, I actually do. I don't have any great-grandchildren, but if I live long enough, one day I will, and I will probably know them. I will never know my great-great-grandchildren.
Right.
And, you gotta be okay with that.
And that's I think where disciple making pathway, a disciple making kind of backbone versus programmatic is very different. Because in a programmatic, you're always asking the question, how can I control this? How can I make sure I'm tracking this right? How can I in disciple making pathway, it quickly goes beyond what you're doing. It's very much so that flywheel, like what we're talking about. Dave, I think that's just an incredible overview of that pathway. And now what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna circle back around. We're gonna start at the very beginning of the pathway with a pre-disciple. And as we share that pre-disciple, Dave's going to talk a little bit about what that is. And then also at the pre-disciple phase, what does somebody need to really grow into that next phase? So if you're going to disciple them, because the reality is there's there's a right maturity and a right thing for each maturity level. Just like with kids. Like you can't expect your kids when they're newborns and infants to be doing the same things you expect them to be doing when they're in middle school and high school. What does somebody need to really grow into that next phase? So if you're going to disciple them, because the reality is there's there's a right maturity and a right thing for each maturity level.
What they need help with is simply discovering who Jesus is.
You need to follow what the Spirit's doing, and you need to trust that the Holy Spirit is the consistent thing throughout this whole pathway and process.